from staff, because I think that they're the ones that are directing these boards and commissions, and I think that their recommendations have some weight and are very important. But, if a consensus wants to move forward. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Kent City Council workshop. Today is Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. This is a remote meeting due to the COVID-19 health and safety requirements and by order of the governor. So welcome to anyone that is joining us on Kent TV 21 on the Facebook live feed, also YouTube channel, and anyone that is dialing in to listen. We will go ahead and get started. We have 2 items on our workshop today, and the first one is a conversation on eviction moratorium expiration, and Merina Hanson has a great presentation. Welcome, Merina.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. And again, I am Merina Hanson, the Human Services Manager for the City of Kent. And as Council President Troutner mentioned, I will be sharing some details about the eviction moratorium expiration. And I know you are all aware, but for full disclosure, for those who might be watching, I am not an attorney, so I plan to stick very closely to the basics as I know them, but I will do my best to answer your questions as well. So just as a reminder, the eviction moratorium is currently still in place at this time, so evictions for non-payment of rent are not allowed. Until the moratorium ends on June 30th, there are only a few instances where evictions are permissible. Once the moratorium ends, there are some things in place that will hopefully help, although there are certainly more unknowns about the timing and how much assistance will be readily available. Some of the things that will eventually fall into place include the reasonable repayment plans, just cause eviction, right to counsel, and the eviction resolution pilot project. So once the moratorium ends, all tenants who fell behind between March 1st, 2020 and that 6 months following the eviction moratorium have to be offered a reasonable schedule for repayment. And there are some very specific guidelines that are attached to that. So landlords cannot require payments of more than 1/3 of the total monthly rent. They cannot require payment until 30 days have gone by since the plan was offered. And they also can't include late fees, attorney fees, or other fees and charges. And this law applies to any rent owed, again, between March 2020 and actually the end of 2021. And in this instance, rent includes that monthly rent plus other monthly charges paid to the landlord. So things like utilities. Senate Bill 5160 was recently signed by the governor, and it creates the first statewide right to counsel. So this means that low-income tenants facing eviction will have access to an attorney. The bill also contains some elements that are designed to improve the eviction process overall, and it protects tenants from housing denial for the inability to pay rent during the pandemic. And the great unknown here is that it will, of course, take some time to get this up and running and ready to implement. So the state law requires full implementation of right to counsel by April of 2022, but the state budget provided funding starting July 1 of this year. And the goal is to have it up and running as soon as possible. Eviction notices and payer vacates will then have to include information on a tenant's right to counsel, and that includes the eviction defense screening line phone number, which they are going to open that July 1, and it will be run by the Northwest Justice Project. And we understand that they are working hard to hire additional staff, so they will be ready, but we also know that that will take some time. I know that you are all already very familiar with just cause eviction, and not long after we passed it here in Kent, we now have it being enacted statewide. So with the passage of House Bill 1236, landlords are required to give tenants a written notice with one of 17 reasons for ending rental agreements and evicting tenants. This includes the provision that landlords can no longer refuse to renew the month-to-month agreements for no reason. So with that 20-day no-cause termination notice you guys talked so much about. And I don't want to dive too far into the details on this, but also wanted to provide some of the kind of clarifying background information. So basically, if you are a month-to-month tenant who has never had a written lease, so like if you have a verbal agreement, for example, this law would apply to you. So the landlord has to give you a written notice with one of the good reasons that I have listed on the next slide if the landlord wants to end the tenancy. If you enter into a rental agreement for a fixed term, so for 6 to 12 months between May 10 of this year and 3 months after the end of the moratorium, your landlord has to give you a 60-day written notice to terminate at the end of the agreed upon end date of that lease. And that notice does not have to state one of the reasons. And then if you have a written rental agreement for a 6 to 12 month term and your landlord doesn't want to renew the agreement once it's up, that's another instance where the landlord can give you a 60-day written notice before the agreement is up and doesn't have to include one of the reasons. But if the landlord wants to terminate before the 6 or 12 months is up, then they do have to indicate one of those 17 reasons on the next slide. And then lastly, if you've had a written rental agreement for multiple 6 or 12 month terms, which most of us were probably used to, then or if you've never had a month-to-month tenant, your landlord has to give you that 60-day written notice to terminate your tenancy and does not have to state one of the reasons. So definitely a lot of potential confusion there based on the type of agreement that you have in place. So this is simply the list of approved reasons for eviction. I shortened it to fit it onto one slide. The notice required attached to each one of these things varies from one reason to the next, from as little as 3 days for something that's pretty serious to up to 120 days for condo conversions. And another piece of really good news is that King County is one of the counties participating in the eviction resolution pilot. So this program is really designed to help renters and landlords agree on how to make up rent instead of going to court. So the ERP allows tenants and landlords to meet with a neutral mediator before an eviction lawsuit is filed. It will also include ways to help tenants find rent assistance. So it'll focus on resources as well. Just a few more details about how this is all supposed to work. So the Dispute Resolution Center of King County is partnering with Superior Court and the Housing Justice Project, and they are essentially neutral. So they are there to help both sides. And landlords, when the moratorium ends, will be required to send 2 notices to tenants before they can proceed to file for an eviction in court. So there's the notice of pay or vacate, and now also an ERP notice. And that ERP notice includes information to contact the Dispute Resolution Center and the Housing Justice Project. And both of those agencies will receive a copy of the ERP notice that is sent. When the DRC receives a copy of the notice, they will attempt to reach the client through however they can. They'll call them, they'll text them, they'll message them, however they can find information for them. And then they'll set up mediation services between the landlord and the resident. And then those services are intended, again, to reach an agreement that both parties can support so that that eviction just doesn't happen. And they can also assist with writing a payment plan. If the resident doesn't respond after several attempts, then the DRC will notify the landlord, and the landlord can file an eviction at that time. So I'm going to transition over to the resources side now to share a little bit about the help that we understand is available. The largest amount of funding in King County will be provided through what we call EPRAP. So it's the Eviction Prevention and Rental Assistance Program. So the county for this year has $145 million in funding from various sources, and it will be used to pay past, current, and future rents. It is supposed to be targeted to people who are most in need, and eligible tenants will receive up to 9 months past due rent being waived by the landlord. So there's kind of an agreement that comes into play. It also includes 3 months of future rent. The EPRAP program allocated $37 million at the end of last year, and they served 9,000 residents. And then our understanding is that with that $145 million, they expect to serve 27,000 residents this year. This slide outlines just some additional details about the approach the county is taking. It's kind of unique. They have a three-pronged approach. So there's the landlord program, which supports large numbers of tenants by setting up bulk payment agreements. So under the landlord program, those who currently have 5 or more tenants behind in rent, they were able to ask all tenants to have all tenants living in their property supported under the program. And that was managed by United Way, and they are partnering with, I think it's Solid Ground, Neighborhood House, Urban League, Wellspring, and REWA to work with landlords who have more than 8 units. And there's also a smaller landlord program. And then there's the tenant program, which supports a tenant self-registration process. So a tenant would go onto the county's website and sign up for that on their own to receive rental assistance. And that program works to promote equity in who is served, with a focus on groups of people who historically have not had fair access to rent assistance. And then they have the Hub and Spoke program, which is going to partner with community-based by and for organizations to serve tenants representative of the target populations that they serve. And my understanding is that one is not quite up and running yet. So there are also legal resources for people facing eviction and or foreclosure. So I wanted to make sure I included a few of those. The Housing Justice Project and Eastside Legal are probably the 2 most robust and familiar to you. So there's all the information that folks will need if they need to seek this type of assistance. And then this is just a more comprehensive list of legal resources that will be available to help. There's quite a few, but they're not necessarily quite as robust. And some of them are more information and referral based and have tenant support information. And then this is the list of Kent agencies that we are aware of that have rental assistance available from a variety of funding sources, including the city for some of them, but also other rental resources primarily. And then I wanted to kind of close out with the list of agencies that have rent assistance from the city itself, whether through our general fund or our CDBG CV funding source. It does get tricky because we have to watch for duplication of benefits to ensure that we don't provide assistance to the same individual the county provides rent assistance to. So we are trying to work with the county to track that. So we do have a couple you'll see on there are pending because that is through our very recent CDBG CV3 process that we are still trying to wrap up and get formalized with our Human Services Commission on those recommendations. And with that, I know you all have a lot to discuss, so I will turn it over to you and I will be happy to answer any questions that I am able to answer.
Thank you, Merina. I think this information is really helpful, especially, for me to understand. I thought, there's a process to this. It's not something that's just going to happen immediately. It sounds like if there was an issue, you're working through multiple steps to make sure, that the tenant is able to get that help and assistance they need along the way. And that's something that was helpful for me to understand. So I really appreciate all this information, but I know that my colleagues have questions, and I am going to start with Councilmember Fincher, followed by Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. You're exactly right. There is help and there is a process. The reason I called for help not only for the renters by extending the moratorium, but also for the landlords, particularly the small landlords, is because one, a lot of them don't know what help is available. So it's important that they hear on both sides that money is available, but also because not all of that money is available right now. What money is available, there is quite a wait list to get in that money. In fact, I've been told with some of it through King County, there is basically a lottery process. So they will eventually get to everybody, but prioritizing who is going first, there's that lottery. And my concern is with the 30th coming, June 30th being the ending of the moratorium, And aside from the funding, some of the assistance, like the legal assistance, is also not available yet. With Housing Justice Project, they're estimating that it's going to be the end of September before that piece is in place. And so that still leaves people at risk for 3 months. And so what I'm hoping we will do is consider extending the moratorium to marry up the two sides, that when the moratorium ends, there is real help available for people. They're not in a queue waiting. People can be evicted in as little as 3 weeks here in King County. And that's a lot shorter time than the 3 months that it's going to take to get some of that assistance in place. I know in talking to some of our folks, for instance, Senator Kaiser, she said that, for instance, the Commerce Department and King County have a list, because King County, there's been 2 other rounds of money, and the state has, it's unbelievable the amount of money when you hear the numbers that have been put into this. But all of that does no good until it's actually able to be, to find out where all of that is, where it's gone, because we also know that when a landlord does take the funds, they're part of an agreement that, okay, this is what we're going to do. But landlords don't have to take any of those funds. They can proceed on July 1st if they want to and didn't take any of the funds with evicting folks. So again, there's that period there. We know that King County, the city of Kent, although we are only 6% of the eviction filings, we are 15%, second only to the city of Seattle. And evictions, we know that most of the evictions are BIPOC folks, most of them Black mothers, single family mothers oftentimes who are then turned out for a variety of reasons. And so I think it's important that we look at this. I sent out an email to all of the council and a few others just a little while before the meeting started, and the other ones you were already privy to from some of the people who had written in. This is a real problem, not just something that we're conjuring up. So I just think that instead of increasing the number of homeless, we need to do all we can to help people actually manage through this, because most people do want to manage. And again, both the landlords need help. I mean, that small mom and pop, or the person who is living off of the rent they get from 2 or 3 houses, they're struggling too. I understand that, but I want everybody to know that there is help when there is actually help available, and then to go after that help.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher. Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. I have a question for Merina and then a question for Pat. So first, Merina, can you go back to the previous slide? Do you know what the total amount is here that the city of Kent is potentially putting into this?
I will use my handy calculator and add it up. I should have done that beforehand and I didn't.
Okay. While you do that, I'll ask Pat. Pat, something that Councilmember Fincher said was that it can take as little as 3 weeks for someone to be evicted. I'm wondering if you could quickly run us through what the eviction process is and what that would look like during COVID times right now.
Good evening. So the eviction process, so right now the courts are dealing with a massive backlog of cases, and it's not clear where the eviction process will lie in terms of precedence over other cases that are pending. There are literally thousands of criminal trials backed up in King County right now. So and the issue is going to be what the courts determine as the priority for what cases go in order. One more point before I go through the process a bit. The state law now requires representation, and based on my reading of that statute, it's going to be much like a criminal case. If there are no attorneys to represent people who qualify for representation, I don't think the court's going to be able or willing to proceed on the case until they get represented. So I think you can anticipate the representation issue causing cases for those people who qualify for representation being delayed until they get enough attorneys on staff. So the statutory language in the bill reads a lot like representation in a criminal defense case. It's a positive right that somebody who qualifies has. And I highly doubt that a judge will move forward on a case against a person who qualifies for representation and because there's an attorney available. I don't think they'll move forward on the case. And so I think there could be delay there. Typically, these cases take a while to work through the system. It is a process that takes a number of weeks. First, there's filing, there's calendaring that has to occur with the court calendar. They have to put these cases in the queue with other cases that are pending. And my suspicion is that along with all of the other general lawsuits and then all the criminal cases that are going on, and the potential for a lot of eviction processes, we're going to have a backlog. The backlog is not going to go away just because the calendar ticks to a new day. So what that ends up looking like, I don't know. But my suspicion is that an eviction is not going to be considered a priority case over a criminal case, especially because we do have people in King County. They have literally thousands of trials backlogged. And in a lot of those cases, people are currently incarcerated waiting for their time. And the court is certainly going to put those cases in a higher priority than eviction cases. And then there's all the other cases. For example, we have a case that I informed you of. We're supposed to go to trial this month, and I am confident we're going to get bumped out and continually get bumped out. I would also note that these civil cases would often get bumped under non-COVID times just because of availability of courtrooms, because emergencies come up and higher priority cases. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see, but I think with certainty, if somebody qualifies for an attorney, the court will not proceed in their eviction until they have an attorney to appoint them. And I fear that they're going to have a tough time finding attorneys, to be honest with you. I think that there's so many cases backed up. My understanding is the King County prosecutor is trying to hire over 30 temporary prosecutors to handle their caseload. If they hire 30 prosecutors on their end, you know that public defenders are then looking for prosecutors or attorneys to handle the cases that they have to defend. And this is going to trickle down all through the court system. So I think that just because we're pulling the plug off this and letting things move forward, I think there's going to be a significant court backlog that will interfere with eviction proceedings.
Thank you, Pat. Councilmember Lermer.
Thank you. So Pat, I just want to be really clear on what we're saying here. Our assumption is that if somebody qualifies for legal representation in an eviction proceeding because of the backlog, let's say they're not able to even get a date for 6 months, they will be permitted to stay in their home that entire time. Or are there circumstances in which they would be still somehow be removed from the home while these cases are pending?
So the eviction process is a court process. And once the court process goes through, only then can a person be physically removed. The court process results in basically the eviction of the person living in the home or apartment. And only after they go through that court process does a county sheriff have legal authority to remove somebody from the home. They do not have any authority to remove an individual from a home without that court order, and they don't do it. I'd also note that that's a responsibility of the King County Sheriff. It is not, Kent Police, city police departments have zero jurisdiction to deal with evictions. So the unlawful detainer is the court proceeding, and the eviction is the result. And evictions can only be enforced by the county sheriff. It cannot be enforced by Kent Police. It can't be enforced by Renton Police. It's only the county sheriff. So until they get an actual court order that demands that they physically remove somebody from the property, the King County Sheriff has zero authority to remove somebody from their property, and they don't do it. They will not move without that court order because there's significant liability if they do that.
Okay, and then I want to kind of like flip the lens here and look at this from the landlord's point of view. Is the landlord short of any type of moratorium protecting the landlord from bank action? Is the landlords, are they responsible to their banks during this period of time if they've fallen behind because of rentals being behind?
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure that we've got like people are allowed to stay in their home and landlords are not going into foreclosure. No,
that landlords could be going into foreclosure because unless they have some type of assistance that they are getting, the banks are, my understanding is if they have debt owned on the property that they're renting, they're still required to pay that. So I'd also note the King County process for mediation, it sounds very similar to the process that is used in small claims court, which are cases that are only handled at the county level. And at the county level, it isn't mandatory, but there is an offer whenever somebody goes into small claims court, there's an offer of mediation and it happens right then and there. And we sometimes have to go appear in small claims court for claims against the city. And that process is very, very valuable. And it can get people put on payment programs. And I think that tool, my suspicion is that tool will be utilized heavily because theoretically a landlord will not have to pay out of pocket for an attorney. And you know, at the end of the day, the landlords, they just want their rent, right? Mm-hmm. And so if they can put together a process where they can start getting some income back on their property, then I think that's a win-win for them. I foresee that as being a tool that could be quite helpful in this process.
Thank you, Pat. Before I move on to council members, Merina, do you have a total? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's $729,381.
Thank you.
From the city specifically.
Councilmember Boyce, you're next.
Thank you, Madam President. A couple of things. First, I think, I don't know a lot of landlords, but I do know two of my closest friends. One live in King County, one live in Pierce County, who own several homes. And my best friend in King County, I do know the issue with the bank, Marley, that you talked about. I mean, it's been like this for a whole year, right? This is nothing new. And him, just one, I'm not saying everybody, have been able to work something out with his bank because he wanted to be able to keep it and collect his rent. But that doesn't say everybody falls in that category. I did talk to Councilmember Fincher. We had some conversation about this particular issues and, definitely respect her in a great deal. But as I told her, I'll tell you, I'm not sure what problem we are trying to solve at this moment here. There are lots of program in place. I do know for a fact that $145 million from King County, that money is available today. I do know that for a fact. I just think there's been a lot of things that put in place to kind of offset what is needed, right? To push this off 6 more months, I'm not sure what we would solve. If I look at what King County put in place, what the state legislature put in place, even what the city have put in place, I think there's a plethora of program that applies to renters who may be experiencing some hard time. As I told Councilmember Fincher, until I hear a problem or see a problem or someone is coming to us with drastic problems, I just don't see what is it we're trying to solve at this moment. And when the time comes where it's 1 month or 2 months down the road between now and 6 months, if there's an issue that come to us, I'll be the first one to gather support and make this happen, right? But at this moment, I try to, I've been thinking about this for quite some time, and I just think that I'm not sure what problem we're trying to solve. It's pretty clear there's a lot of things put in place for support for the renters, and and I haven't had any landlord coming to us, saying that there's a problem and worry about losing their home. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and definitely open to further conversation, but I'm just not too sure what problem we're trying to solve at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. Councilmember Corr, and then Councilmember Fincher, I will circle back to you.
Thank you. Councilmember Boyce, I have to respectfully disagree with you. There's a problem we're trying to solve, the problem that's coming. We're trying to get ahead of the problem because we know individuals, as soon as the moratorium's lifted, they don't have money saved up to be able to pay back rent and the resources that are available. Yes, it looks like 145 million is a lot of funding, but it's going to the whole county. And I would have to think that a lot of it's going to Seattle. And we still need to think about our communities, because I think some of the conversations I've had with King County funding, they're trying to direct a lot of funding to unincorporated areas because jurisdictions like cities should be able to at least take some type of care for their communities. And unincorporated areas are, they don't have council members or cities to take care for them. So county is trying to be responsible for that. So I hear it, but there's a problem coming. And my husband's a landlord. So thankfully we don't rely on rent, but I know a lot of communities do. Small landlords, they are waiting on that rent. And if they're not getting paid, right, they are struggling day to day. So I can see the problem on both sides. So I think I would hope the state will do something about this and extend the moratorium, because it would be better if the state takes an action, because then it's the whole state, right? City by city, it's kind of hard, but we at least need to try to take care of our community. Thank you.
Councilman Corr, I just want to real quickly, I totally agree with you 100%. This is a state issue. That's one thing I totally agree with you. If the state should take care of this here. Also, listen to the process that Attorney Pat talked about for us having representation, right? These things are not going to happen overnight, and that's kind of where I'm at, right? And I think if we do have an issue, there's things at the city level we can do overnight to stop it if it comes to it, right? So, so I just want to kind of just throw that back at you, but I totally agree. This is a state issue we need to get in front of.
Sorry, but Council President, the other thing I forgot to add, and I was about to, was a lot of our community members do not know about the resources that are available to them. A lot of our communities don't understand and speak English, and we have amazing organizations trying to do the work, but I know it does not always get to the people. So I feel like that's the other part that we need to do some, because community members do not know they have access to legal counsel. They don't know they have access to funding, or they have, they can reach out to one of these organizations and get some support. So it's also about getting that information out there to the communities.
Councilman Corr, how do you suggest we do that? I mean, because I totally agree with you, and I know lots of we could do through our Facebook and all that, but I'm not sure that will reach the population that we need to reach. I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts and ideas how we can make sure that people who don't speak English as well, how to make sure that they can get this information, so we can, as a city, we can kind of help lead that charge?
Yes, I think we need to have conversations, maybe, leaders in the communities and maybe faith-based organizations, letting them know, and you don't have, like I said, a table there, at least letting people know that this is the information that's available, or putting flyers out there in their language, maybe just, go to different organizations and leaving a flyer like, hey, this is it. If you're, you need help, this support is available to you. So we definitely need to do a better job of that. And grocery stores or any other places you can find, because it's definitely something, we need to educate our community about. A lot of community members do not know they have access to resources.
That's another thing I agree with you also. And I let this go, Council President, I'm sorry, but I disagree with Councilmember Court on this here that, I would ask that, what is else we can do, and the mayor and Derek, the communication team, to make sure we reach out to the groups and let them be aware of what's out there from a legal perspective. So I would love to hear the things that we can do. Right now, I'm where I'm at right now, and I'm probably going to stay here. But I like some of the things that Councilman Court talked about, because I want to feel good about that we have reached out to all the community, let them know the program, let them know about what can happen and can't happen. I think we owe that to the community. So the mayor, Derek, I'd be kind of interested in to make sure we are reaching out to some of the community. Maybe Merina, you may have some ideas too. So thank you, Madam President. Let me dialogue. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyce, and thank you, Councilmember Core. I'll get back to you, Councilmember Fincher, but I just wanted to make a couple comments, and then we'll all have had an opportunity to say something, and then we can circle back around. But I think I do have concerns about extending the moratorium ourselves as a city. We talked about maybe the state needs to step in and do something, but if we extend the moratorium, then, several months down the road, we're going to be still talking about this same issue. That I don't know, because we've already let people know, the state has let people know for some time that this is going to be coming into effect on June 30th. And now we're going to consider extending it, which again, down the road, you're looking at that same problem. So just thinking of a scenario, let's say I'm a tenant and I want to set up a payment plan. So I go to my landlord and I set up a payment plan to where I have to pay a third of my rent over a period of time is kind of what I'm seeing. But I'm also struggling to come up with that third. So then technically, could I look to some of these rental assistance programs to help me at least through this process, be able to pay something to my landlord kind of on a regular basis until I can kind of get myself caught up or be able to pay more? Is that that is one of the things that I can do? Is that correct, Merina or Pat?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then let's say I just plain out don't want to pay my rent. I have no intention of paying my rent back. And the landlord looks at me and says, well, okay, here's your notice, but the landlord has to give 2 notices. Then they have to file an eviction with the court. And then there's a mediation set up to talk about whether or not a payment plan is something that can happen. So 2 different scenarios. One is someone who wants to pay their rent back. The other who hasn't had interest in setting up that payment plan. Either one of these, it's still a process that you have to go through. And in the second scenario, it's not like you can just get evicted in 3 weeks. It sounds like there's going to be a process for that. So I just feel like extending this idea is just going to put us in the same situation several months down the road where we're looking at this same process of, well, now what are we going to do with these people? So I don't know. I just have concerns that, we've got these opportunities available. People have ways that they can get assistance. They can work with their landlord to set up this plan. And they've known this for some time that, are we seeing people starting this process that we know of? I mean, Marina, are you aware of anyone that has worked out these repayment plans or working through this assistance piece that are being successful?
So my understanding is that people can begin the process now. I don't have any statistics or any information about if that is occurring. I would imagine it's not happening on a large scale yet, but I can look for that information too. I'm happy to try and to address. It's not perfect by any stretch, but just, touching on the comments from Councilmember Core, the King County program, they do have the rent assistance available in 28 languages. Again, it's only helpful if they know it's available, but that is also information that they're trying to have community leaders get out into the community. And then, that's part of the reason why they're trying to develop that hub and spoke model to really get the resources out into the community where those populations who haven't had as much success getting the rent assistance can get it from agencies that they're comfortable and familiar with. Totally agree. It remains to be seen like how that will all play out. Like, you know, it's just a huge unknown, but that's what King County would say if they were on this call.
Thanks, Merina. Councilmember Thomas, I know I keep telling you I'll come back to you, Councilmember Fincher, but Councilmember Thomas hasn't spoke yet.
Well, thank you, Madam President. So I heard you say something I'm not sure I agree with, Tony. You said that a guy could be paid back 1/3 of his rent that's due, that's been past due. However, so he'll have 1/3 plus his current rent, if I hear this right. For example, he owes $900. He's been paying $900 a month rent. So now he gets 1/3 of that is going to be his payment for next month. That's $300 plus his current payment that's due for the following month. That's $1,200 due. Is that the way you see it, Pat? Where
Yes,
Pat went?
yes, yep. I think you've interpreted that correctly.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. One of the other things that I would suggest that we do is I think this is actually worth a mailing with the QR code that leads you to the 5 other top languages that you can get the letter in. But we have to get the letter into the apartments, into the homes, along with getting the word into the Gurdwaras, into this, well, we don't have any synagogues out here, but into all of the different faith centers and community organizations. I think we have to make a good effort. Somebody who I know, 40 years old, I was surprised that she did not know that instead of draining her 401k, which she was going to do to catch up on her back rent, and at 40 years old, she would have to pay that back, and that's quite a loss in income for when she retires later up the road. But she had no idea that she could get help. And this is somebody who has only lived here in the United States, has always spoken English. So the problem goes wider than our communities where English may not be their first language. This is something that far and wide needs to reach for both sides, again, for both the renters and the small landlords. And because they're, I do not feel good hanging my hopes that the courts are going to be backed up. And that's why this person will be saved from losing their home. We already know that people, at least I know, that people have self-evicted already, because there are those landlords out there who don't tell people, and then the residents don't know because they don't know their rights, which I realize is not the landlord's fault, but it really is something they're supposed to be helping that tenant know right now. But they're self-evicting because the landlord will say, okay, if you leave now, I won't put this on your record. I'm not going to have to file papers. You'll be able to get another apartment. If you wait and I have to evict you, then you're not going to be able to get another apartment. So using that as a tactic, those are the things that I worry about with the self-evicting. And I'm not asking this to go on forever. I just wanted to go on until the services are actually available. And yes, there are people who through King County have gotten money. I believe they've allocated around $95,000 worth of funding the last I heard. But what happens is you're lucky enough to get your number, and then you're into a lottery to be able to get picked so that they do know who they're going to take instead of just going down the list where Jane and Bob and Joe got. They're putting everybody into a lottery and then selecting people. So eventually they will make it down to person Z, but person Z may have to wait quite a bit of time, especially in lieu of the wait times that are there, the backups, not only for the dollars. And King County is one source. The state is, has been generous, but then there's also the federal funds. But still, one thing, is that actually going to be enough? But even aside from that, when it's not ready, when it's not there to help, when the legal assistance, and I certainly hope, and it seems that Pat would be correct, but I don't want to just hang the hopes of people who this is their livelihood, this is their home, this is their child's school and their neighborhood, this is the proximity they wanted to live from, the job that either they had, hope to get again, whatever, hanging those hopes on probably this is what's going to happen. I think that we can follow what some of the other cities have done and protect our residents, get the word out to our residents who are renters, our residents who are landlords, and help both sides.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher. Just a quick question for you. When you say people are self-evicting, is that landlord then out of getting any back rent from that?
No, the landlord does not have to be, the tenant does not have to be in the property. So even people who have left already, they can still apply to get that back rent. And if it looks like they just up and left, there's no reason that they wouldn't be able to get the back rent. For instance, the company who you knew had $12,000. And that's another thing. The company who was owed the $12,000, it's not just the small landlords who do not know money is available. The case you told me about, that's a large group. And they did not evidently know that funding was available for them.
Right. Well, but in that particular case, that person wasn't paying rent because they were saving that money to go and spend elsewhere.
Which would not be protected under this case. So this is only, and having to show proof is perfectly fine that this was due, my hardship was due to the pandemic. This isn't a time everybody else is paying rent or mortgage. This isn't a just get out free and live free thing. This isn't a time for people to take advantage because there's too many people out there who are actually suffering and who need the help.
Very true. All right, Councilmember Kaur.
Thank you. I have a quick question for Pat, actually. Pat, so when the landlord files eviction, whether the renter wins or loses, it goes on their record, correct?
It doesn't go on any kind of personal record. It could go into a record that could be searched in terms of, so a landlord could search the King County filings website, but no, there isn't a record kept. It could go on a credit report or something like that, but not any kind of government maintained record system.
But it goes on there, if it goes on their credit report.
It could, yeah, it could go on their credit report, and it can also just be a record that that is a file in the King County Superior Court that anybody can go look at.
Thank you.
Yep.
There are some additional protections that Pat absolutely knows more than I do, but there are some things that are specific to evictions that occur due to COVID. So I'm trying to look at my notes really quickly.
I think you had a slide on it, Marina. That was going to be my question.
Oh, okay.
Because I think when the slides referenced that, I wanted to confirm that if it was a COVID related.
I have notes at least that say that landlords are prohibited from reporting to prospective landlords that a tenant was unable to pay rent or was evicted due to non-payment of rent that accrued between March 1st, 2020 and 6 months following the expiration of the eviction moratorium. And then also that a prospective landlord may not take an adverse action based on a prospective tenant's non-payment of rent that occurred between that same period of time. Landlords are no longer able to limit access to a court by requiring tenants to pay alleged arrears. So there are supposedly some new protections that were part of that bill, but that doesn't mean that people can't search the county database and things like that. So Pat will know more about that. I just know that I had a little bit in my notes that I may not have said in the presentation.
It also sounds like there's nothing keeping it off their credit records.
Yeah, and I don't know that. Sorry.
Okay. And then so then my other question I think would be for Pat and Marina, maybe Marina or Brenda just anecdotally. I'm trying to imagine if there's a scenario where, because the landlord doesn't know these services are available to them, they therefore then, encourage, I guess, self-eviction or something. I guess I'm just worried about how do we how do we protect the misinformation that could lead to evictions and people? Basically, we know eviction is the number one cause of homelessness, and the last thing we want is to add to the homeless population because of the fallout from a job loss during COVID. So,
I think that was part of why they built in some of those notifications that are required, and Pat should probably chime in on this, not me. So I think that was kind of why they did some of that. But again,
and do we know how those are communicated to landlords?
Pat probably knows better than me.
Yeah, I don't know the specific answer as to how those are communicated, but I can tell you that it's a statutory requirement that the landlord offer a repayment program. And if the landlord doesn't do that, the landlord is not entitled to proceed with the eviction process. The other thing I would note is in King County, because of their pilot program, like I described with small claims courts, if a person is in court and they show up to their eviction proceeding, before the judge even takes the bench, a person will come out and suggest that they are available for mediation. So as long as they're showing up to court when they're supposed to, which is always a big question, they will have an opportunity to participate in that mediation program. So I think those two things are, mainly that the landlord has to prove up that they provided a repayment program option to the tenant before they can even go through with the eviction process.
Okay.
And I think that was also part of the reason why they kind of took the landlord out of the equation in terms of notifying the tenant. So it's actually the Dispute Resolution Center and the Housing Justice Project that will be trying to reach out to the tenant directly. They're gonna do that versus the landlord doing it to get them to try to go through that mediation. So hopefully it kind of inserts some neutrality into it, but again, a lot of unknowns.
Councilmember Boyce, followed by Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Madam President. Great conversation. Really appreciate having this dialogue. It's been nice hearing the perspective from each one of the council member. With that said, I'm still at the point I was earlier when I made my statement. When I see King County not adopting a countywide plan, that kind of made me wonder why. Then you read the Seattle Times editorial who voted against this here a couple of days ago. At the end of the day, I personally believe in the spirit of the free market, right? So it made me wonder sometimes, sooner or later, if that free market is not working, where it's today or 6 months down the road, as a landlord, they could get frustrated. And when I get frustrated, it could have an impact on renters, as in, I can sell my house, right? Or I can take the apartments and turn them into condos, right? So that's why I'm a little nervous about, what we are trying to do at this moment and making sure it doesn't have a long-term impact, when you talk about the free market. And I will say this again, when I understand there's a huge problem in Kent, right, with this particular issue here, then I will lead the charge to try to help us get something in place right away overnight. But I just, right now, I just don't, I don't see the issue that we're trying to solve. And, I just don't think we're there yet. I really don't. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. This question is for Pat, and I apologize if you already talked about this. So at what point in the process would a judge say, do you have legal representation? When would that come up?
That would come up before anything happens in the case. The way the statute reads, it says that the individual has a right to representation. So as long as somebody meets the requirements of indigency, then the court can't proceed with anything until an attorney is appointed. If they treat this like they do a criminal case, that means appointing an individual and specific attorney or a specific law firm. At that point, it will take a little bit of time for the attorney to ramp up and understand the case and be in a position to provide quality representation to the tenant. So I have no idea how this is going to work in light of the potential volume that they're going to be dealing with. But I can only relate it to a criminal case. And so, for example, in Kent, better than 85% of our criminal defendants are represented by defense counsel, appointed defense counsel. And in those cases, they're appointed on one day, and a few weeks later, there's a hearing because in that time, they've received paperwork, the attorney has, they've received paperwork, they've become familiar with the case, and now they can start representing the individual in court. So there will be some time. I think there's going to be some time when the court doesn't have anybody to appoint. And then once there's an appointment, there will be a matter of a couple of weeks where the case is set over for the assigned attorney to get familiar with the case and start working on the matter. And that happens at the very beginning of the case.
Thank you, Pat. Just for the looking at the clock, I want to make sure we can get through this conversation and allow enough time for our second presentation. I'm going to go to Councilmember Thomas and Councilmember Fincher, and then maybe we can kind of come to a consensus here.
Thank you, Madam President. I've been listening to some good conversation here, and I understand where I think everybody's coming from. So I try to put myself in a position, suppose that I was in France and I lost my job working for Air France, and I've got a wife and 2 kids, and I'm going to go, oh my gosh, I got rent due at the end of the month. What am I going to do? I would do everything possible to seek out a solution, going to my pastor, my priest, a good friend, somebody that may know something about government and all that stuff. It's kind of like what Bill was talking about, and I'm just sensing that I don't know if the problem is as big as we're making it. Maybe I'm overstating it, but anyway, I'll let everybody else talk. Thank you.
Councilmember Fincher.
Hi, where I work is one of those places that people call for help. And during the pandemic, for instance, and we do return calls, but I know that I have called some places and it has been a while before getting a call returned to answer a question, just because the offices, especially for churches, are not staffed the full time as they were before. So sometimes people, and other places, people are working from home. Oftentimes people, when they're looking for help, they don't get help from one place. They have to call a series of places and get part of the rent from place A, then part of the rent from place B and place C, and so on. So that takes a while, even in good times. So again, having the point that people have to depend on, there wasn't a lawyer, and so this judge is going to decide to kick it down the road to have to be able to have that case heard. Why not just help people in the beginning? And I do like that idea that was floated earlier about being done at the state level, contacting the state. We could do that as a council. I personally have written Representative Taylor asking for her help in getting this. She was already doing that, or rather asking to lend my help to that. But as a council, that is something that we could do. We want to do that at the state level because it is better to have the state. But in lieu of the state, until the state does something, instead of people leaving them in limbo, and I know that we will, and I imagine Derek said the same thing to all of you, we know that we will hear from some people about this during our council meeting. But this is a real problem. Some people are out there who do not know where they can turn. Some of the churches may not know where they can turn. At my church, it depends on who you ask. We try to train the staff on what's available, but knowing that we can help people, I think that's, I don't think it's too much to ask just to, again, marry up the time. have it until we know that services are supposed to be there so that people can get the money, people can get the assistance to be able to stay in their homes. People can get the help if they're a landlord. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher. All right, one more comment, Councilmember Boyce. Councilmember Boyce, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. This question is for Pat. And so the state have something in place to say the moratorium is going to go away June 30th. So we as a city, I mean, legally, I mean, can we override that or put something in place from a legality perspective?
Well, you know how much I hate this question. This is, it's, you know, literally the $250,000 question. I don't know the answer to that. I would prefer not to give you my real legal opinion here in a public meeting. It's a challenge. I just would remind you all that as we dealt with our own ordinance a while back, we had cases in Burien, Seattle, and Federal Way pending. And in Burien's ordinance was determined, part of it was determined invalid because it conflicted with state law. So there's a challenge on laws like this that are statewide because there is an interest in the legislature to ensure that there's uniformity in the state, much like I've mentioned this before, much like driving type offenses. You don't want your driving rules to change every time you go through city limits. So there is a strong desire in the legal system to have uniformity on statewide issues of this nature. So there are some challenges to this. I can opine. I would prefer to do that in a attorney-client privileged format as opposed to on the record here, because if we do take some action at some point in the future, I don't want to chart out somebody's lawsuit against the city. So that's my preference.
And that's fair enough. And I guess I'm going to just wrap this up from my thoughts. Councilmember Troutner, you know, we had a meeting not too long ago where we had our state representative that attended this meeting, and they had done a good job for the city of Kent. I would propose that, you know, we as a council put a letter together to send to those state reps that attended this meeting, and if they wanted to add more, fine. But we had a good relationship with them, a good dialogue with them, and encouraged them to work with the governor, you know, because he can do this at a pen stroke on his own, right? To put something in place to match, with the end of the year time frame. And once again, a lot of respect for my friend, Councilmember Fincher. We talked earlier, and I just don't see the issue. When the issue do come, I will be the first one at the table to try to push and help us get something in place to stop whatever bleeding that may occur. But I just don't see it at this moment. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyce. So kind of need to have a consensus here, and I'm not feeling like I'm getting an overall consensus to move forward with this. One of the things that I did hear, though, is that maybe we can come up with a good way to communicate to our community, to our tenants, to our landlords, to our residents, what information is available, what support is out there, and making sure that we're reaching our community leaders that have the ability to also reach other areas of the city that might not speak English or need some extra information. That I think that that's a great idea. Councilmember Fincher, you have your hand up.
I'll wait till you finish.
I mean, I was just going to say, I think as far as moving forward, Councilmember Boyce suggested maybe reaching out to our legislators, but I think a communication plan to the community to make sure people know what resources and services are available would be a really good help as well. So go ahead, Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. We don't know if we have consensus yet, so I was just hoping that we would see if we actually have consensus or not.
All right. I guess, so all of those that, if you can just kind of let me know, nod of a head, or if you are in favor of keeping it the way we have it and just going by the state's moratorium that will end on the 30th. So I'm seeing.
I think less, from what you said, I think less is actually, you said keeping it the way we have.
I'm saying not moving forward with anything and just going by the state's lift of the moratorium on the 30th, and then moving forward with communicating to our residents what services and opportunities are available to get them assistance. So I see a thumbs up from Councilmember Thomas, a shake of the head. Councilmember Boyce, I already know your thoughts on this. I have expressed my thoughts as well. So I do think that that is a consensus. Councilmember Fincher, did you have another?
Well, you just named 3 people. So is it 3 people saying?
So Councilmember Boyce, Councilmember Thomas, Councilmember Michaud, and myself have all expressed interest in just going with the state's recommendation of the moratorium being lifted. But I do believe that the suggestion of reaching our community through different opportunities that we can talk through is a great option, so that everyone knows what services and assistance is available.
I just want to add real quick, we as a council member, right? So we have different people that reach out to. I hope that we can still have this dialogue amongst ourselves, whereas if you're hearing something going on, we need to have that conversation, talk to one another. I think at the end of the day, we all want to do what's right for our citizen. And I just think as time goes on, if there's something out there, then I think we've made sure we have this discussion. So thank you.
Councilmember Lermer.
Did we come down on where we stand on a council action or council letter encouraging the state to extend?
I can work with Derek and individual council members to see what would be the best solution if we want to come up with something all together or individually, if that's okay with everyone.
I would hope that we would do it as a council, right? And I hope it's something we can do right away, hopefully by the end of the week. I don't know what's on by the plate, but I think the sooner we get out in front of this here, and I think we all as a council member support this here, so if we can get this done quick and reach out to the council, to our state legislator that was at our meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I think Councilman Fincher add another person that she talked to. We need to add as many we know. Let's add it up there, and I'd like to move forward this here right away.
All right, Councilmember Fincher.
I was just going to thank Councilmember Boyce. That's exactly what I was thinking, because this is time sensitive with it. When it was Councilmember Jamila Taylor, or I'm sorry, Representative Jamila Taylor. So yes, I think that this should happen as soon as possible, and it would have much more strength coming from the entire council instead of just coming from us as individuals.
Wonderful. Well, I will get together with Derek on that and follow up with all of you shortly. So thank you very much for that great conversation. I think we actually came up with some good ideas and some ways that we can work through and hopefully do what's best for our community. Moving on to the next item, which is the Mid-Biennium Budget Adjustment Priorities. Paula Painter.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I do know that we're a little bit short on time, so I'll keep my presentation pretty brief, so you have an opportunity to chat as we move forward, or chat for the remainder of this meeting. As you know, back in May, I came to you and we did a recap of how the 2020 fiscal year looked. You may recall overall the tax revenues did come in better than anticipated. However, we did have some significant losses in other areas. But the city did take swift action early in the spring to address those revenue shortfalls that we were expecting, to be able to preserve that general fund balance. And then in addition to that, the departments continued to come in under budget. As we start looking at 2021, we're finding that revenue continues to come in as expected. We are seeing sales tax coming in better than anticipated. So that is also a great sign there with that. However, we still do have declines in our revenues, such as charges for services and license and permits. But as these restrictions begin to lift, we're going to anticipate seeing some improvements in those revenues as this year progresses. And what that really looks like, we're not exactly sure at this point, but we do anticipate improvements there. In addition, great news, I got back from vacation, came into the office Monday to learn that Monday morning we received our first installment of our ARPA funds, which was just over $14 million. So that is exciting to see this progress. And then about 12 months from now, we will see that second payment from our ARPA funding. And we are really excited to learn that the governor did sign the passage of the SST mitigation payments. So we'll start getting those effective July 1st. And then also with 2021, there was some conversation we had about the struggles that the liability fund were having. And so this year we are transferring $4.4 million from the general fund into that liability fund to get it to its 70% confidence level in that fund balance. But another thing that's also impacting our 2021 is inflation. We're definitely recognizing that the cost of this inflation is going to limit our ability to make big increases in our positions and other expenditures. We're continuing to monitor that. Next slide, please. Because as we start thinking about the 2022 biennial budget, we did anticipate CPI at 2.5%. Right now, as of April, we're sitting at a 3.7 CPI balance. So that's going to be another thing that will, not knowing the June rates, it will be interesting to see what those numbers look like moving forward. So as we look at the 2022 biennial budget, there's going to be a few things that we already know of that we have to address during that process. First off, we did not budget the revenues and expenditures for House Bill 1590. We did budget about $300,000 for some of the items that Council proposed during the budget process. We also want to take a deeper look at our sales tax revenues because we do know they're coming in greater than anticipated, and there may be some potential for adjusting those revenues for 2022. Also getting the budget in there for that sales tax mitigation payment. Again, I talked to you a little bit about CPI, so we will have to do some salary and benefit adjustments. I did learn today that retirement costs are going to be going down slightly going into starting July of this year, and those are set by the Department of Retirement Systems. Finally, we want to look at frozen positions, those positions that we froze, we did not eliminate during those budget reductions last spring. And then our additional equity costs. I do know that we're looking at additional expenses related to interpreters, the speaker series, participatory budgeting, the Balancing Act, and other things like that. So we do have to look at that as well as some of our cost allocations. And so this is something that we look at during this mid-biennium budget each year. So these are some of those items that we have on our plate. This is a big, go ahead, next slide, please. This is a big week for us because we're starting off talking with you guys to see what's important to you related to this budget process that is coming up. But then we're also doing our budget kickoff on Thursday this week with departments to really get the ball rolling in-house. And going through our process, pretty typical, hoping to get it approved by November.
Really quickly, Councilmember Thomas has his hand up, so I don't want to get too far.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll make it quick. Paula, thank you, Madam President. Paula,
Yeah.
Going back to that 4.4 million in liability allocation, is that because of that huge lawsuit we had?
There are multiple factors that feed into this. So we have an actuarial study that looks at not only our experience in-house, but also the market. And the market is actually having a big impact too, because you're seeing liability insurance going up in the entire market, not just the city. But yes, our claims also do impact those. So as we do make out claims, it does impact what our experience levels are, and then also our requirement for reserves.
Thank you.
My question was the same as last, but wouldn't you say that our claim have a significant impact to this year? Would it be accurate to say?
It would be accurate to say, yeah, it does play into it, but we don't want to diminish the amount just in the market itself. It really did play a big part of that as well. Councilmember Fincher, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Speaking of the market as a whole, I've been listening to some of the conversations that even worries with the Olympics in Japan being canceled, that could have an impact on what we have to end up paying next year and year after, or for years to come. So I'm glad to see that we're putting more into that fund.
Yes, yeah. And actually, that was great timing with the questions, because this was really my last slide to kick it off, to allow you guys an opportunity to have some discussion. So Council President Trautner, I'm going to turn that back over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paula. So does anyone have any questions or comments to bring forward to Paula at this stage in the process?
What stage is this in the process? Where are we looking for input from the council on the budget? Can you talk a little bit more, please?
Yeah, this is an opportunity. We're going to be meeting with departments later this week and kick off our budget process. So this is a great opportunity to hear from council members about what is important to you as we start looking at this budget that you want to have some discussion about for us to consider as we're putting any of these adjustments together to this budget.
Is this a one and done, Paula? Or can we get you stuff now and more later? Or what's it just where we at?
Well, I'd really hope that we could get the ideas to be able to share with departments when we pull them all together this week. So it'd be great if we had this. I do know that we are going to have continued workshops and continued discussions, but this is really the best opportunity to be able to get those out so we can get these items in the forefront.
All right, so I've got hands raised, starting with Councilmember Larmer, followed by Michelle, then Boyce.
Thanks. Paula, I saw the frozen positions mentioned on one of the slides. Will you be providing, or could we get a list of those positions that were frozen? Just, I'm not sure where I would go back to find the original list.
Yes, I don't have it right in front of me, but I'd be happy to get that list out to you guys.
Yeah, and then my other comment, I know one thing that's priority for me, and I know Councilmember Boyce and I, we discussed this months ago too, is there's a lot of equity work to be done. And I think, funding additional positions in that department in order to carry out that work is going to be critical in order for us to actually perform the work that is going to come through the strategic plan, and to do it justice and do it right. So fully funding that department, meaning adding more bodies to that department, is going to be one of my priorities. Additionally, then I think as we come out of this, just making sure that we have additional, staff to take on some of the additional objectives that we had previously. I think that's why I want to see what positions were frozen exactly, to give you a better idea of where I'm looking at what I'd like to see funded again.
Okay.
Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you. I have a question, and then I have a couple of priorities. First, Paula and Derek, I know we made a list during our last budget process of a whole bunch of things that we were going to readdress during the mid-biennium budget. When will we be able to revisit that?
I will pull up that list of information that we were going to revisit this cycle and send that out to you. That's going to take me a little bit to find that, not a little bit, but just to get it in a meaningful manner to be able to get those sent out to you.
Okay, I think that would be helpful for our conversation. And then something I want to make sure that we think about is police data. After we get this report, we're going to need some money for things like the dashboard. And I know the police computer system needs updated anyway. So that's just something to think about.
Councilmember Boyce. Oh, Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam President. And I know our Parks Director, Julie, is up here, and I have not talked to her about it. I did bounce this off Derek. I want to, I know we had some, was able to get our swimming support up at Lake Meridian this year, and I understand why. But also in talking to the new director at the YMCA, they have suggested they'd be willing to partner with the city to train swimmers and make sure we have a resource of swimmers to support places like Lake Meridian. So I just think that's something we might want to look into. And Julie, I have not talked to you about this here, and don't mean to surprise you, but I think there could be an opportunity for us is to, if we turn that over to the Y and let them be responsible for providing swimmers and it might, but I'm looking at it as a process improvement, not because of the issue that we had this year, but I think based on what I heard from them, it sounds like a pretty good program, and they are doing this at other parks and recreation in other cities. So that might be something worthwhile looking at. And I guess if you don't mind, if Julie on the phone, I'd be interested to hear her thoughts around that. I'm not putting her on the spot.
Thanks, Councilmember Boyce. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if we were going to hear from Julie or not. A couple of things I just wanted to add on to Councilmember Michaud's comment. That we also need to think about adding at least a temporary position during the budget of somebody to do data entry so that we can start collecting data now and that entry gets put in when the system actually is in place. But instead of having to wait until we have this, pick out a system, wait until we have the system all built, and then start collecting data. As I've mentioned before, we need to be collecting data now so that we have the data to actually input and be ready to go when we have the system. I'd like to also have extra money with equity for, or have money budgeted for the Equity and Inclusion Speaker Series. We know that that was a popular series, but it was because of the budget constraints, we were not able to offer as many sessions as we would like. And that was something that I saw as a value to the community. Also, with the daycares, I know that the daycare centers, we've been able to provide those. So looking at money to make sure there's enough money. I know there's money from the state and from the county. In checking with child care resources, they were not sure. They've been so underwater, they don't know what their needs are right now. So to keep an eye on that and see if more is needed there. But we do know, at least I know, that more is needed in our child care assistance. So the assistance fund we have for families, we have about 3 to 4 times as many families on the waiting list as we are able to serve. So additional funding for that. And then I will stop right there because I have a list of other things that I'll give somebody else a chance to talk to first.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Michaud, followed by Larmer.
I agree with everything that Councilmember Fincher said. I think that equity, or the is that what it's called? Equity speaker series is really important as well. Also, I don't see anything on here about the layoffs that occurred. I would hope that that would be in discussions as well as the frozen positions. Some departments were hit harder than others, so I would like to take a look at that as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Michaud. Councilmember Larmer, followed by Core.
Thank you. So I just want to echo what Councilmember Michaud had said about the data analysts. And I do think that in our frozen positions, we had cut or froze a analyst in the police department. So I'm interested specifically in bringing that position back. I think that's going to be critical to carry this forward. And I see it being a long-term investment beyond just this collection process and stuff. I mean, there's going to be a constant need for data analysis and public safety. The other thing that I think where we could use some more support from staff would be in housing. I mean, we know that we just wrote the Housing Action Plan. I know that there's a lot of things coming out of, Affordable Housing Committee that I see other cities that are, have a lot more staff support in those meetings, providing analysis that I just don't think we are staffed, to do that. And I'm sure that, Councilmember Core probably sees that on growth management council and planning as well. So I think, housing and density and growth and all those matters are going to become just more and more critical for us to make sure that we are on top of and fully, as the elected representatives, we're not the subject matter experts. And I think we could use some more support in that to just make sure Kent's interests are fully represented in those meetings. So I want to look at augmenting the staffing there too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Larmer. Councilmember Core.
I'd have to agree with everything that Councilmember Fincher and Councilmember Michaud and Larmer have said. In addition to that, I'd like to have a conversation about the Green Kent Steward program that we talked about it in the past, and then we said we will discuss it or come up with the new framework, but I have yet to see what we're doing with that program because it was a very important program from our community for key clubbers to volunteer, get their hours, and get involved in our community. And we were recently in different parks, and looks like we could definitely use our park stewards at this time. And Councilmember Larmer already said our human services. I'd like to see a little bit more funding in human services as well. And obviously our cultural conversation series is very important to me. We've talked about that before. I'd like to see some funding for that. The other thing that I've looked at other cities and organizations around governmental organizations, we have 0.25 person for 7-member council. I'd like to see if we're able to bring somebody in who's able to support the council members better. Not that our staff person's not doing a great job, but their plate is pretty full. So I'd like to see somebody who's able to keep us on track and, we're more involved in the community instead of, just kind of texting, hey, was this on your calendar? Are we having this event? And so, just kind of having a person that we can reach out to for any questions or any legislation. They can do a quick research. The position that I used to do when I was working for the city council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Core. Councilmember Boyce, followed by Thomas.
First of all, I thought Councilmember Core was lobbying for her job, but I wasn't too sure. So all jokes to the side. Process question. Paula, Derek, somebody said, we throwing a bunch of stuff out, including myself, right? So are we just going to take those down, go typical, and take 4 of us to say yay, nay? So are we just the first step of just kind of brainstorm and then we bring them back? And then you need 4 people to move it forward, or just a process question on what we're doing right now?
Ideally, it would be great if we could have some consensus on what topics we do want to move forward. Again, I know we're kind of short on time, but it was something that we were hoping we could share when we met with departments on Thursday of what some of these priorities were, so we could have them begin working on some of these items that were talked about.
And the reason why I say that, because this is a budget adjustment, right? So this is different than a full-scale budget, right? So we just need to keep that in mind because it's all about adjustment. So there have been a lot of things kind of thrown out there, even what I said, right? So we just want to make sure, that's why I asked the question, because it's not a full-scale budget adjustment is what we're doing. So thank you.
Very good point. Thank you, Councilmember Boyce.
Yeah, I agree, Councilmember Boyce. Good point. A lot of those things would normally be funded during a regular budget process. So, Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam President. So Bill is right on. I'm glad he said that. My 2 cents worth here is that I know you're going to take some of these things that you want, or each member has talked about wanting, and as we go into the budget toward the fall, we're going to see these things come up. But I would say if we're going to add something like personnel, then you should subtract somewhere. I like balance, see? Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to add a person to a certain department, then I need to find money for that person. And that means a plus or minus. And I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it does to me. I'm sorry, I'm an accountant. So, all right, thank you.
Makes sense, Les.
Thanks, Councilmember Thomas. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. I thought that this was also not only the budget adjustment, but we were also looking at the ARPA funding, so that we were giving ideas for both. Are we only talking about budget adjustment right now? Because most of the ideas I have were not for the adjusted budget.
I would say that we're collecting for both, because we're actually rolling both processes into this whole budget process. Everything will be separated out, whether this is operating, capital, or the use of ARPA funds. But we just want to make sure that whatever we're choosing to do with those ARPA funds, that we're doing it with, it's a one-time expenditure, whether it's a one-time operating project or a one-time capital project. We just want to make sure that it's not ongoing.
Okay, good. So in still looking mostly to the ARPA funds, I would like to make sure, I'm not sure where it would fall under the mayor's office or human services, but to check with our communications department, see where we are as far as getting our council meetings and our different meetings on TV captioned, so that more people can have access to them and translated, to be able to, for Zoom meetings, have a translated button to actually get it so everything that goes out has all of our, the ability to be translated. So I think that one is a big one. And then as far as graffiti cleanup, there's certain areas of the city we see quite a bit of graffiti in. And so I would like to have something budgeted to that, where we could actually have a cleanup crew, and put some of our folks, that it could be some of our homeless folks, some of our youth, to work painting out the graffiti, and then actually possibly painting a mural over, but that there's some sort of stipend attached to that for the youth or the unsheltered person, whoever is doing that with the crew. And there's more to that naturally, because there has to be supervision. But to look at that so that we can get a handle on, or more done as far as graffiti, get some of the things painted out faster.
All right, Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, it's great that Councilmember Fincher brought up graffiti, and I'll connect with you, Councilmember Fincher, because I was doing some research this afternoon, and has some interesting policies and ideas that I think might be worth looking at adopting as well for their control. And then thank you for bringing up the fact that this is also ARPA money, because I wanted to, say that this is not going into this. This is not your typical mid-biennium that we'd be going into. So we have an opportunity here to do things a little differently than we probably normally would during an adjustment. And then I guess just a question for Paula, because I know, I have friends that have worked in, government before, and they worked on very clear, like time limited contracts. They knew that they had a full-time job for 2 years. They had a full-time job for 4 years. And because of the long duration of the funding coming in through ARP, is there any reason that we couldn't fund somebody on like police data collection? Is there any reason why we couldn't say, we're hiring you under the understanding this is a 2-year program because that's what we have funding for. And then in 2 years, if we find more funding, great. But, this is a limited time position. Is there any reason why we could not do that?
No, there's not a reason why we could not do it. It'd have to make sure that it is meeting one of the requirements of the use of the ARPA funding for what we're doing with that. But yes, that as long as it's a limited term and so therefore it's equivalent to a one-time issue.
Right. Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
All right, Councilmember Boyce, do you still have your hand up? Oh, no, Councilmember Fincher.
Yeah, if no one else wanted to speak, I have another. So with the human, it was just a way to keep the money with our Kent folks who are in need, to be able to distribute that money and have it stay in Kent. I read about Centralia, I believe it was, who was doing a script program where that script could be used at certain any stores of the participating stores within the city. They could use it to pay utility bills. They could use the money in Kent. And so if we have our organizations giving out whatever amount of funds that is decided to people who are in need, then they use that script. It would have to be something that couldn't be counterfeited. And that way it keeps the money in Kent with the Kent businesses, the Kent paying. If you're on Kent utilities, you could use it, and then it's reimbursed by the actual grant money to whoever turns in that script. So are you understanding what I'm saying on that one?
I believe that I am, and I will look it up for a little bit more details. And if I have additional questions, I can always give you a call.
And I can give you some additional details. They were lucky. They had a printing press, so they were able to print on wood. So we don't have that ability, but we can do metalwork or something else. But just thinking of how to help, with our folks who would qualify for assistance, giving them some sort of script instead of, even if it's that script goes to, ABC apartment complex, if we decide that we want to use some of the money to help pay for rent. ABC apartment complex turns that money into the city or to Agency B, who actually gives them in the place of the script. You give me $500 in script, I give you $500 in actual funds. But the money then stayed in Kent.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher. So Paula, I've seen you take a lot of notes. I know we've given some suggestions. I think you've heard some things repeated. Some things are just kind of mentioned once here and there. So hopefully that has helped you. I know there was a lot of comments around data collection. I know, and actually a person in some kind of an analyst position. I know that we have information that's coming back to council at some point to see what has been gathered in the community. Is that something we would typically look at during a mid-biennium adjustment, or would we look at something like that more during an actual budget year?
Typically, if it's a new program, we're looking at it during a regular budget cycle, the budget year cycle versus the mid-biennium. Mid-biennium, typically, we're looking at things that maybe were unforeseen, not major program changes, et cetera.
All right, thank you for that information. Derek, do you have something you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam President. I've been taking notes as the council has discussed these ideas. Many of these ideas around equity, staff is already planning to move forward through the process. So I think that works well. My notes show at least 4 council members who are interested in police data activation in some form. So we'll move that through the process as well. Layoffs, frozen positions, we're already going to allow departments to propose reinstating frozen positions or reversing layoffs. But the big caveat, like Paula said in her remarks, is that with rising inflation and just the continued unstable revenue situation and expenses, don't want to make any promises about what we're able to do in that regard with ongoing positions. So that's just kind of my attempt to capture or marry together what's in the budget instructions, as well as where I heard consensus from council this evening.
Great, thank you, Derek. All right, anybody else have anything else to add before we just have a little bit of time here for people to take a quick break?
I'm hungry.
All right, really good discussion this evening. Thank you, everyone. You've got a little bit of time before we come back for the council meeting at 7. So we will see you soon. We are adjourned.